Hi, this is Paul Bereen welcoming you to episode 3 of Religion Then and Now. This is a podcast where we look at the biblical roots of Judaism and Christianity and look deep into God's commands about religion that have been ignored for lack of understanding of mysteries, parables, and symbols. The title of this episode is Part 2 of Understanding Demons, Devils, Satans, Evil Spirits, and Antichrists. If you have not yet listened to part 1 of this series, I strongly suggest that you do that before listening to this episode. I ended part 1 by saying that these mythical creatures symbolically represent all kinds of religious leaders, whom we identify as pastors, priests, rabbis, apostles, prophets, bishops, elders, deacons, overseers, popes, missionaries, theologians, and other religious leaders. Basically, I said that religious leaders, great and small, living and dead, are all human examples of mythical demons, devils, satans, evil spirits, and antichrists. And I said that biblical references to these mythical creatures are God's way of telling us to avoid false prophets. In this episode, I will begin to explain why you should avoid false prophets, which is an all-inclusive name for demons, devils, satans, evil spirits, and antichrists. If you really want to understand false prophets, the main thing you need to do is resist and reject the deep-seated historical religious belief that pastors, priests, rabbis, apostles, prophets, bishops, elders, deacons, overseers, popes, missionaries, theologians, and evangelists are all legitimate, anointed clergy called by God to preach to lay religious people. I'm here to tell you that they are not legitimate, and they are not called by God. They are, in fact, deceiving impostors, wolves in sheep's clothing. That is why God warns us to avoid them. He knows what we don't know, which is that they are bad for our spiritual health. Or to put that another way, rather than connecting us to God, they actually separate us from God. Now, I know that rejecting the legitimacy of religious leaders will be hard, even impossible for most religious people to do. And there are many good reasons why rejecting them will be difficult. I'll mention a few of those reasons. First, the legitimacy of religious leaders who preach, sing, and lead people in religious activities appears to be a biblical commandment. So, because no one wants to be unbiblical, rejecting the legitimacy of religious leaders would be biblical heresy for people who interpret the Bible literally. Second, extensive recorded history of powerful, influential religious leaders with titles like pastors, priests, rabbis, apostles, prophets, and so on in government, in Judaism and Christianity argues strongly for their legitimacy. It is hard to dismiss religious leaders who have played important, visible roles on the stages of religion and world history for thousands of years. Third is the fact that religious leaders are always attractive, charismatic, and well-spoken. They always have good reputations until they do something really stupid, like sexual sins that become public. Fourth, it is hard to reject religious leaders with training and credentials that enable them to communicate understanding of difficult scriptures. They are so convincing that we assume that they must have special gifts from God that enable them to preach and write with clarity and deep understanding. Fifth, we must admit that the symbols of legitimacy and holiness that some religious leaders carry on their bodies as specialized clothing and jewelry create an image that seems to confirm a unique, God-given power and authority. Clothing has nothing to do with their qualifications, but it makes them appear to be special and believable. And sixth, it is hard to reject religious leaders who are held in high esteem and trusted and honored by people we trust and with whom we have deep relationships. It is hard to disagree with people whom we believe to be wiser than we about religious matters, and it is hard to argue with friends and family who fully embrace religious leaders, love their teachings, and willingly invest money in them. And seventh, we must acknowledge that there is a more or less universal attitude, if not a firm belief, that there is something very special, even holy, about religious leaders that is so well established that even people who are not religious honor them, respect them, and give deference to them. These are all good and reasonable reasons why you would want to reject my suggestion that you should reject the legitimacy of religious leaders. I understand these ways of thinking because, for many years, I also embraced the legitimacy of religious leaders, even to the point of wanting to be one of them myself. So what I'm trying to say is, I understand how you might react to my suggestion that you look at religious leaders differently. Having said that, I must also humbly admit that I was wrong in my assessment of religious leaders, and I must tell you that you also are wrong if you are unwilling to reject their legitimacy. And here's why I was wrong, and why you are wrong if you continue to hold religious leaders in high regard. The big problem is that you and I, have been trained to always respect religious leaders, to always trust them, and to never doubt their legitimacy or the truthfulness of their teaching. That training is a major handicap to understanding Bible symbolism, including the symbolism of demons, devils, Satans, and evil spirits. More to the point of this podcast, our problem was and is that we have been indoctrinated by religion to always trust religious leaders. This indoctrination comes from man, not from God. Some religious people are able to break free from all kinds of religious indoctrination. Those who do break free from it often look back and call it brainwashing. Breaking free from any kind of brainwashing is never easy. Besides messing with your mind, getting clean from religious indoctrination usually creates problems with the relationship, which is also very messy. But freedom is possible and is happening with radical frequency in these modern days as we see church attendance decline. People who have broken free from religious indoctrination will find it easier to understand Bible symbolism that equates demons, devils, Satans, and evil spirits with religious leaders. But people who remain faithful to their religion will find it very difficult to accept the fact that biblical symbolism of demons, devils, Satans, and evil spirits, and antichrists all point directly to religious leaders of all names and titles. The minds of faithful religious people are made up. They are in bondage to religion, and they are okay with that. They love their religious leaders and will not reject them, even if God says they should avoid them. Let me try to state the problem this way. Religious leaders, family, culture, and friends have successfully trained us to put our full faith and trust in demons, devils, Satans, evil spirits, and antichrists. As long as we believe what religious leaders, including family and friends, have taught us, we will never understand what God wants to teach us about mythical demons, devils, Satans, and evil spirits. And as long as we remain ignorant of the powerful hold that these beliefs have on our minds and our hearts, we remain possessed by the very people that God wants us to avoid. Well aware that what I'm saying is very controversial and hard to absorb, I'm going to end this podcast here. But before I let you go, I must admit that it is impossible for me to squeeze all you need to know about false prophets into a few short podcasts. That is why I strongly recommend that you go to www.thewaywesee.com/links, where you will find useful Bible study resources that will erase some, maybe all, of the doubts my podcast may raise for you. If you're interested to learn more, you would do well to subscribe to my podcasts on the Bible Interpretation channel in YouTube, or by following me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram. I'm always a public figure, so anyone can see my profile and posts. Another thing you can do to make sure that you get notices about future podcasts is to go to www.thewaywesee.com/links, where at the top of the page you will find an email link where you can request to receive email notices of future podcasts. Pleased that you listened this far. This is Paul Breen inviting you to return for other Religion Then and Now podcasts.